Good morning, everybody. I apologize for my voice. As you know, if you have small kids, then they're germ factories. So I'm sure everybody has to deal with that. I'm not a doctor, but I'll take a look anyway. So, that sort of a thing. But anyway, our daughter's 2 years old, almost 2 years old. She has Apert Syndrome. You saw some pictures of children with that. But really, from the very beginning, just to give you a little bit of background, we had no idea. Not any idea whatsoever the day our daughter was born. We also have an older daughter. Her birth wasn't necessarily normal, but the apprehension everybody feels with their firstborn. But our second-born daughter, everything seemed to progress pretty well. We woke up that morning, and it just seemed like, oh, okay, well, all right, it's a good day to have a kid. So off we go to the hospital, and we get there, and things seem to be progressing pretty normally. And then about, what'd you say? 26 hours later, we knew something wasn't quite right, and so Jeannie went in for a C-section, and I saw our daughter first as she came out, and I knew something wasn't right. You could tell that her hands and toes, they had syndactyly, so they were fused together. Also, some of the slides you saw with sort of the buggy-type eyes, things just didn't seem right. And so the first question that the doctor asked us, well, is there any history of genetic disorders in your family? And there was none on either side of the family. It just happened. So that really started our journey. So here you are, you've got your second child, and you go from up here to what's going to happen. How is this going to play out? And so it was devastating in a way, and Jeannie will talk about that a little bit more as far as the grief you encounter, like, is my child even going to survive? What's going to go on? You just really don't know. And so it wasn't here at Riley, so and I won't say which hospital it was, but they basically said, well, here's some information. They handed us a packet, and it was stuff you could find on the internet. And so that tells you nothing. I mean, it's your child. You love your child, but you want to know what's going to happen. And I can definitely say that in the first couple of weeks, you're just not going to know. It's going to be difficult. You're not going to have any idea what's happening just because each child's different, and you're not going to know their needs until you start taking that journey with them. So we also visited a geneticist, and we got a very thick packet of clinical stuff. And we're like, oh, crap. I mean, so suddenly you have to look through it, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, let's see, what is this word? And you're looking it up. So you start to educate yourself, and really I guess that's kind of the first point I want to bring up, just to educate yourself. I mean, look at medical journals. It's going to be dry reading. Please don't read it right before bed, because next thing you know, you'll wake up at 3 a.m. with the light on. You're like, what happened? I don't know. So, just learn about it. I mean, whatever your child has been diagnosed with, learn about as much as you can. I mean, every situation is going to be different. You'll read horror stories on the internet. I mean, like, oh my gosh, my child died in her sleep at 18 months, and you're like, oh no, what's going to happen? And so there's always a constant fear as a parent, is my child going to be okay? And I think it's normal to have those fears. It's normal to have that worry. When you're in the midst of it, it's extremely difficult. I mean, a lot of tears, a lot of questioning, a lot of praying. It's just very different for each person, but it's hard. It's very hard, and we all need to, I guess, as parents, admit that to ourselves, that it's going to be very difficult, because your life has now completely changed. Your relationships change. Your focus in life changes. I mean, if you're, a marathon runner, and all of a sudden you have a child with special needs, I don't know. Marathons don't seem so important anymore. So, decision making, that's a very difficult thing too. I mean, you've got to consult as many sources as possible. Have a good relationship with all of your doctors. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions. If you have to have a surgery, what's the mortality rate? It's not, excuse me, it's not something you want to know, but it's something you should know. So just ask questions, even if they seem silly, even if they seem like, well, if they don't go to the bathroom, is that a problem? Things like that, things you just wouldn't normally think of. So as far as education too, I always recommend first aid and CPR, just simple stuff. Just, get to know basic things. Is it infected? Is it not? Do I need to call the doctor? Red Cross, American Heart Association, they all do that sort of stuff. I guess I had sort of an advantage, because I hate to make this analogy, but my dad's a veterinarian, so growing up and seeing like, oh, that doesn't look right, you can tell pretty quickly. So, just try and get online, educate yourself as far as there's like the Children's Craniofacial Association. So that's an umbrella for parents with children who have any sort of craniofacial abnormality. So Apert, Cruzon, Treacher Collins, Pfeiffer, it covers all of those, and cleft lip and palate, stuff like that. They cover all of those things. So if you get in touch with people like that, they have retreats every year. Families get to meet each other, and it's hard to find somebody to sympathize with you. Like if you sit down, your friends, you're like, oh man, I've got to deal with all these doctor's appointments and surgeries and post-operative care, and they give you a blank look. What do you do? I mean, so having somebody to talk to who can sympathize, who can understand your journey, that's a big thing. So just finding a support group. Advocate for your child. Education, like as your child gets older, understand their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, do they have, maybe they have sight problems, maybe they have hearing problems, but wherever they're getting educated at school, whether it's public, private, advocate for them. Talk to the teachers, talk to everybody. Just getting as involved as you possibly can so that your child has, a quote, sense of normalcy. I mean, they're going to have challenges. They always will. But if you can help them get past those, then they'll be a stronger person. Excuse me. Another thing, too, is that you learn a lot from your child. So you're not just the one that's pulling in all the education, but they teach you as well. They teach you a lot of patience. They teach you to be more self-sacrificing, a lot more giving. So it's neat to see how strong your child can be when you're just a weepy mess and, oh no, my child's in surgery, just stuff like that. But just seeing how, like our daughter, when she came out of surgery, after she had a cranial vault reconstruction, I mean, it was pretty pitiful. There's the whole mama, that sort of a thing, and it just kind of gets to you. But, what was it? Within a couple hours, she was smiling, and she didn't want to move her head at all, but she was smiling. And so as difficult as it is to see that type of, surgery, it does give you hope every day as the recovery goes on. So another thing, too, besides talking to teachers, people in the community, get in touch with your politicians, state representatives, stuff like that. If you see something that's lacking in your public school system and you want to advocate for your child, do it at the state level. Get in touch with your local rep and say, look, in our school, our child needs X, Y, Z, whether it's hearing testing equipment, accommodations, if they've got vision problems, anything like that. So Indiana First Steps is a great organization. We use them. So it's just a matter of you having to grab onto whatever you possibly can to help your child out. So after that, up to Jeannie.
Hi, I'm Jeannie. I'm Ben's wife. And Ben kind of touched a little bit on what it's been like for us as caregivers. And I would like to talk a little bit about self-care, particularly 3 points. One would be finding balance in your life. Another one would be acknowledging your grief. And finally, discover your purpose and your passion. So the first one in finding balance, Ben and I were thrown into this sort of crisis management mode immediately following Sarah's birth. People speculated, the medical community speculated that Sarah had Apert, but we really didn't know until those first 2 weeks with the diagnostic testing. We had to go to several specialists. I was constantly taking her to get x-rays, renal ultrasounds, 3D CT scans, all kinds of things, blood tests. And not to mention I was postpartum. I was in this fog, this haze, and I was trying to adjust to having a second child. I was trying to help my daughter adjust. So finding that balance is really difficult, and we have found that over time it's a steady difficulty. So in the first 3 months following Sarah's birth, we had a lot of requests for people to help us, and we took those. That took a lot of humility on our part because we've always been very self-sufficient, independent people. And knowing that we were in a position of needing help instead of giving it was really tough, but necessary. And so we said yes to everything. People offered to clean our house. They came over with meals. People offered to babysit our older daughter so I could take Sarah to her appointments. And of course, after a while, that tapered off because people assumed that we had discovered kind of a new normal, which was true, but not true. So I found that what was lacking for me as the primary caregiver, because I'm a stay-at-home mom and Ben is the primary breadwinner in our family, what was lacking for me was the socio-emotional support. And my background, my training is in counseling, and this was emphasized over and over and reiterated about self-care. And most of you who are healthcare professionals hear about it a lot, but we're really poor at implementing it. And so I realized that not only did I need to take care of my physiological needs, my basic needs, which were very fundamental, but I also needed to find that support system, and I needed to find something that would help provide an avenue for me to express myself and to find deeper meaning and purpose in this mystery that we were enshrouded in. So that kind of leads me into the next point I'd like to mention, which is acknowledging our grief. Grief is a topic that I speak about quite often. It's something I write about as well. And it's something I discovered is kind of my niche. Because it's something that's taboo in our culture. It's something that we kind of run away from and we repress in a lot of ways. We don't like to acknowledge negative feelings. But yet, for Ben and me as caregivers of a child with a very rare medical anomaly, we had to acknowledge that life was not going to be the way we thought it was, that we were grieving over the loss of who we thought Sarah would be, the life we thought we would have, but also grieving in a sense of there's a loneliness because we can't relate to typical parents and typical families. So I really think that it's important for us to, instead of suppressing or repressing that grief, when we are in that crisis mode, we really need to enter into that pain and be comfortable with the discomfort. So we have to sit with that a little bit. And that leads me into the next point I want to make, my final point, which is discover your purpose or your passion. For me, that is writing and that is speaking. And I actually recently wrote and is published my first book, which is available out here for purchase. It's called Navigating Deep Waters, Meditations for Caregivers. This is a book that I felt would have been helpful for me when I was a new caregiver 2 years ago, because it touches on that spiritual and psychological aspect of self-care that I feel is very much lacking. We were, as Ben said, we were given these very clinical and sterile medical textbook copies as far as what is Apert Syndrome, what can you expect. And this meditation journal that I wrote it for those of us who are in the throes of grief, in the throes of a crisis, and yet we really want to discover that healing and that place of peace where we can dwell. So that's my passion and my purpose, and I have found meaning in the midst of all of this uncertainty. There are very few statistics as far as prognosis for Apert syndrome, and we know families that we've met and networked with through the Children's Craniofacial Association, also through Facebook groups that are available, that they've lost children to death at 18 months of age. Some people live to be 65, but there's really no way to tell. And when people ask us about Sarah's prognosis, I say, I don't know. And when I first said that, that was a scary thing for me to admit. But when I say it now, I'm at peace with that. And that's why I wrote this journal. That was one of these tools I wanted to be available to all caregivers, not just people that have children with special needs, but also people that might be a caregiver like in the medical profession, or people who are caring for a spouse with Alzheimer's, maybe someone who has a parent who has some sort of or multiple complications or medical problems. And so this is kind of a general resource or tool that I created that helped me in a cathartic and therapeutic way, and yet I'm hoping will also help and benefit other professionals and caregivers who are trying to navigate that very nebulous area of where am I going, and how can I find and maintain that sense of peace. So that's what we had to talk about today, and I really thank you all for your attention.